So before I get into this video, I want to describe what trauma dumping means to me. I think it's important to draw the distinction between trauma dumping and venting healthily. So I view trauma dumping as unloading sensitive and traumatic information all at once without really considering the well-being of your listener. I feel like when you trauma dump, you're letting everything out all at once, not thinking about how it could impact the other person. Venting, on the other hand, I feel like is done with considering the impact it will have on the other person, and it's a balanced conversation where you both are in position to listen to one another. So we all trauma dump every now and then, because sometimes life just gets overwhelming and you can't help but let it all out to whoever will listen. However, I don't believe this should be frequent. I also understand that there are different factors playing into this, such as individuals who are neurodivergent, but even considering all these factors, I still think that there are healthier ways to go about sharing distressing information. I'm mostly going to be talking about the negative implications of trauma dumping in this video, and I want to charge y'all to remember that I'm not a mental health professional and I'm not giving professional advice, but I'm just a 25-year-old who's been through her fair share of traumatic experiences, and through those experiences, I've found healthier ways to cope. I'm not perfect, I'm not 100% handled with everything, but I just wanted to share my opinion on the subject, which thankfully is not a crime. So as you heard in the intro, today's video is on trauma dumping and how I feel like it can harm more than help. Again, I feel like trauma dumping is pretty negative, while venting is more healthy and positive. So again, this has become really common on TikTok. You've seen people discussing trauma dumping. Is it right? Is it wrong? You also see people actually trauma dumping on the platform and all over social media. So this is a very, very big conversation, and I just wanted to give my 2 cents on it and how I see it. Also, I don't know when I'm going to upload this video, so if I upload this after Christmas, I hope you had a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. And if I upload this before Christmas, I hope you have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Right here, I have my vanilla chai tea latte. It is pretty much cold now, and I had whipped cream and it's pretty much depleted into the drink, but it's okay. It's still here. It's still here, so holiday vibes are still here. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and let's get into it. So what is trauma dumping? So trauma dumping, to put it simply, is defined as sharing traumatic experiences without asking for consent from your listeners. So don't get me wrong, I'm really happy we live in a society that's just so much more open to discussing mental health and situations that we're going through, especially considering decades past, they were not open to hearing us have these conversations. And I'm so happy that our society is more open to it. However, I do think it can get pretty dangerous when you don't ask someone for their consent before you trauma dump on them, because what can happen is this person could possibly not be ready to handle that information. They may not be equipped to handle it. They may not be in a good mood for it. And so you never know what kind of triggers that you're unloading on them by discussing your trauma without asking. Also, I wanted to make one thing clear. So for example, let's say you have a friend and you want to vent to them or you want to talk to them about your situations, but they don't ever seem to give you room to do so. I think that's when you really should start evaluating if this person is really mentally or emotionally equipped to even handle deep situations, if they're worth being a friend, if you feel like you can't talk to them. Like if it feels like they're always saying, oh, you're just trauma dumping on me, or they're trying to spin it on you all the time, I think that's worth evaluating, because they may not be the kind of friend for you. But I also think on the flip side, I think it's worth evaluating, because it could be that maybe you really are trauma dumping on them. You're not actually venting healthfully to them. You may actually be dumping on them and never really asking them how they're doing or if they can handle it at the moment. So I'm speaking specifically about friendships here, and I think with every situation, it's a case-by-case basis. So I think that takes wisdom, discernment, and just evaluation to see where you fall into the equation. If you find yourself wondering, I wonder why this person is always upset with me when I want to talk to them, they never want to let me talk, I think it's worth evaluating if that person is really worth your time, or maybe they may have a point and you may have to reevaluate how you cope and how you handle those sorts of situations. So like I said before, trauma dumping can happen with pretty much anyone. I just spoke about friends, but it could also happen with coworkers, with family, with associates, just strangers, basically anyone. No one is safe from trauma dumping. So I wanted to discuss a concept called secondary trauma. So secondary trauma, which was defined by Dr. Charles Figley in 1995, is the natural consequent behavior resulting from knowledge about a traumatizing event experienced by a significant other. It is the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. And so this term was coined to really refer to people that are going through very high stress occupations where they're dealing with trauma survivors or dealing with people working through trauma. So this could be counselors, this could be even teachers sometimes, first responders, nurses, physicians, people that are always exposed to that, and it can end up becoming a secondary effect. So even though this concept has been largely associated with people having those professions, I also think nowadays in the age of social media, I think we've all in one way or another have gone through some sort of secondary trauma. I think we've all been maybe triggered at one point or another by something we saw online, and that brought up emotions and feelings and things that, you know, we thought we worked through or things that we didn't realize were still stressors. I mean, it's the fact that since we have access, we can share these at any time, and that means anyone could possibly be triggered by stories that they're seeing being shared online. This also brings in privacy concerns, but I'll discuss more on that later. So I saw someone on my community tab point out compassion fatigue, and I actually thought this was a really great call out. So compassion fatigue is defined as a consequence of secondary trauma, and it is characterized by physical and mental exhaustion and a loss of empathy or compassion for others as a result of the ongoing demands of being empathetic and helpful to those that are suffering. So it can get to a point where you're so used to hearing traumatic information that you essentially become desensitized and you have no more energy in your tank to really care for people that need that care. And so I really feel like even for myself, I think I've fallen victim to this. I've talked to so many of my friends, family, we've all fallen victim to this because I feel like there's only so much you can care about at one time, and you don't have the capacity to care about so many different things. You're being inundated with so much trauma on a daily basis from social media, from the news, etc., and you really don't have the energy to care anymore. And I really believe this feeling can be accelerated by trauma dumping, where someone, maybe if you know someone like a coworker or someone you see regularly that consistently does this without your consent, I think this can be accelerated because you're constantly hearing things that are just negative. And maybe if it's become a regular occurrence, you're like, oh, well, she's about to talk about something else terrible today. So you don't even really have the capacity or energy to care. And going back to venting, again, the reason why I think venting is a lot more positive is because it's a two-way street. I feel like when you're venting, even if it's one person who is doing the venting, you both can still engage with one another in the conversation. It feels like it's still a mutual give and take. You know, maybe you can help each other get through the situation. Like, okay, how do we help you? What do we do? And you can help someone work through it, and it's healthy and it's not as frequent. I feel like it's also not something that is as frequent. So when I feel like you're constantly discussing a lot of stress or a lot of trauma consistently, that could be an indicator that you aren't really working through it on your own. You're not really taking the measures and steps to work through it. And so I think where someone is being inundated with that on a consistent basis, that can be very daunting for them. And like I said in the intro, I think we all at some point trauma dump. You know, there's always going to be a moment where you might just, life is just too much and you have a lot on your mind and you kind of just divulge. You know, that's a human thing. We all do that. So there's no shame. And if someone makes you feel shame for that, they're not a very good person. Okay. Like, it's something that we all go through. However, it shouldn't be a regular occurrence. So again, while I do think sharing traumatic experiences in a lot of high stress situations have helped a lot of people find freedom and relief in their situations and also making them feel less alone, I also think it can have a huge impact on the person sharing that information, especially when it's on social media. So some people genuinely do it as a cry for help and other people do it for attention. So some of the impacts that I feel it can have on the sharer is that it can honestly sometimes make your symptoms worse. You know, you might end up experiencing heightened anxiety, heightened depression, heightened feelings because you're sharing it. And so if you're retelling the story, it's like you're reliving it. I think it can also leave you vulnerable to criticism, which is very harmful. So when you're sharing things online without really a lot of discretion or doing it impulsively, then it can leave you to criticism, because that means that there's thousands of people who have the ability to comment on what you're going through. And that can lead you to a lot of criticism that you may not be mentally prepared or emotionally prepared to handle. And what you're sharing can also be misinterpreted, so it can really lead to stigma. So people can end up stigmatizing you as that girl who went through this, or that guy that went through this, and it can be misinterpreted and misconstrued, meaning that people take it completely out of context, and then all of a sudden you were divulging information because you really felt it was pertinent to do so, and then people take it and run with it and spin it into something completely different, and it becomes a beast that you just can't tame. So I think as it pertains to public and private sharing in the digital age, there are always blurred lines. So like I said before, it makes sharing very easy because we have access to social media 24/7. So anyone can just pick up their phone impulsively and share information and share traumatic information online. I think another factor is audience ambiguity, meaning that you're sharing it with people you know and don't know. And I feel that this is a good and bad thing. I think it's a good thing because, like I said earlier, you could possibly be really helping someone because they could feel less alone, maybe giving them ideas on how to deal with their situation. But it also can be a bad thing for reasons I said before, like people misconstruing what you say, people misinterpreting it. You know, some people can twist it and make it seem like it's your fault. I've seen that before, where people will hear what you've had to say and they'll make it seem as if it was your fault you went through that thing. And so you're constantly being exposed to judgment, you know? So once your story goes viral, it's out of your control. You know, you hear the saying, whatever goes on the internet stays on the internet. It's out of your control once it goes viral. So it can really fall into the wrong hands. And again, like I said, there are good effects of sharing your experiences. You know, a lot of people, again, have found so much freedom, but I think there's a difference between kind of just divulging without really thinking it through first and divulging carefully. I also think it could just lead to overexposure, so you can get a lot of unwanted attention. Maybe people start contacting your family or doing something crazy. You know, I've seen a lot of stuff on social media over the years where people just are crazy with it, and they could end up, you know, talking to, you know, your friends, family, whoever. So I actually wanted to share some insights from a book I read called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. And I really love this book. So it's right here, The Defining Decade. I read this for the first time when I was 20, and I read her old version. So I think her first version came out in 2012. This one came out in 2021 after the pandemic. So this one's more updated and more relevant for today's society. And I love this book. I devoured it. And she said something incredibly poignant about this topic that I wanted to discuss. So in this chapter, she's discussing a woman named Danielle that is going through a lot in her professional and personal life. She's going through a lot with work, a lot with her relationship, and she's constantly stressed out. She's constantly scared. She's constantly worried. She gets the Sunday scaries. And basically, she just is feeling a mess. And so she'll go to her mother a lot to divulge information, to help her feel better, to help her cope. And that was kind of the way she handled all of her stressful, traumatic issues. So again, she would call her mom a lot on her lunch break at work to divulge this information to her, and Dr. J told her to stop doing that. And Danielle said that she calls her mom to make her feel better. And so Dr. J says, and I quote, "I know it does, but those phone calls are robbing you of the opportunity to calm yourself down." So when Danielle called her mother, she was doing what therapists call borrowing an ego. She was reaching out in a moment of need and letting someone else's frontal lobe do the work. We all need to do that sometimes, but if we toss our distress like a hot potato too much, we don't learn how to handle bad days on our own. We don't practice soothing ourselves just when our brains are in the best position to pick up new skills. We don't learn how to calm ourselves down, and this in and of itself undermines confidence. Research shows that people who have at least some control over their emotions report greater life satisfaction, optimism, purpose, and better relationships with others. I wanted Danielle to have all these things and more, and so I pressed her to take responsibility for what was going on in her brain. So then Dr. J proposed to her, what if you got yourself through your lunch hour? And so I thought this was so interesting, and I thought this really resonated with what I was feeling in regards to it. I feel like when you are constantly looking to other people to divulge information, you don't really learn how to handle it yourself. And of course, it's important to have your tribe, have a therapist, have people that can hear you out. That's a healthy part of life, right? And that's where venting comes in. That's what venting is, I believe. But I believe trauma dumping is where you're consistently talking about everything that stresses you out without really working through it yourself. And I remember talking to one of my friends the other day about this very topic, and she was like, you know, I just feel like people don't know how to sit in the uncomfortability. They don't know how to sit and work through their emotions and their problems. You know, it's easy to just borrow an ego instead of really sitting with it. And, you know, for me, I'm someone who's been through traumatic experiences in my life and very difficult situations. And I recognize that for me, when I really found the most healing was when, you know, I would vent to someone, a therapist, a friend, or whomever, but then I would sit with it and work through it on my own. And I think this kind of goes into ways to process trauma. You know, this goes into different ways to process it. You know, for me, when I would process either trauma or just everyday stressors, something I really like to do is I like to pray. So, you know, as a Christian, you know, I believe in God and I really go to the Lord with things I'm struggling with. It's truly a relationship, you know, so God is also my best friend as well as my father and stuff. So I go to him and I stress out and I unload. And I know that it's not all on my shoulders, that, you know, God is carrying that weight for me. I don't have to carry that weight. I wasn't designed to carry that weight. And so being able to put it on the Lord's shoulders and then go to other believers for encouragement and exhortation really helps me. So that's something I do a lot, you know, as well as reading the word. And then I like to journal a lot. So I've been journaling for 5 years, almost 6 now. So literally 6 years of my life is in books. And I also like to color, as you saw in the intro. So for me, that's a lot of ways that I like to work through things that I'm struggling with, things that I'm stressing about. I think it allows me to sit and process these things on my own. And like Meg J said, I feel like this really builds your confidence as well, because you're able to recognize that you got out on the other side. You're able to work through these emotions. And I know a lot of people that watch me are college students. I know on a lot of college campuses, maybe not all, but a lot of them, they offer free therapy and free counseling. So I did this when I was an undergrad, you know, during my junior year, I went to therapy and I didn't even go because I felt like I needed it. I was just like, I might as well go. It's free. You know, if I'm paying all this money for school, I might as well use whatever's free, you know? And so I didn't even think I really needed anything, but then I went and I worked through a lot of things that I didn't realize were really kind of grating at my nerves. You know what I mean? I didn't realize there were things I hadn't processed, and it was really healthy for me. And it gave me a lot of confidence in my decision making, because that was one of the biggest things I realized. I didn't trust myself to make level-headed, sound decisions, which was so ironic because my therapist showed me quite the contrary, you know, so it was very helpful. And so that's obviously a big thing, but there's so many other ways to get an outlet. You know, I think in general, it's so important to find an outlet, you know, to find an outlet to exercise that muscle of uncomfortability and really working through things. And I believe it's very possible that, you know, all of us can work through the things that have hurt us so much. I believe that everyone should have that freedom and that relief, and it's very possible. For me, I definitely really find solace in my faith, and I believe that everyone can find solace in being able to understand that you can be free of things that have hurt you. You know what I mean? Like, I think we all should find ways to do that. I also wanted to bring up one other situation. I forgot to address this earlier, but I also wanted to bring up another scenario real quick as it pertains to trauma dumping. And I think this has to pertain to people who are working in public facing jobs. You know, like I said before, there's a lot of people, a lot of professions that work directly with traumatic instances, but then there's people like hairdressers or store clerks that are just doing their jobs and they hear people discuss their everyday stressors. And, you know, I think a lot of these people are welcome and open to doing that, but I think it can be really stressful for them. And I got a comment on my community tab that basically said, well, if you're working this kind of job, then it's part of the job and you have to deal with it, really. And I just didn't agree with that. You know, no disrespect, but I just didn't agree with that, because I think a lot of these people are working these jobs just to make ends meet a lot of times. A lot of times they really don't have a choice but to work the job, or maybe it's a stepping stone to another job. And I think it's unfair to expect a person to deal with that every day just because they're working with the public. Again, if you're working with the public, you have to be open and personable. You have to be kind to people, right? You have to be able to give people a pleasurable shopping or experience or service. But it's not part of your job description, I think, to constantly hear about people's stress. I know what happens regardless, so there's not that much you can do about it, but it's not a part of your job description, and you're not getting paid to listen to someone's trauma every day, you know. And if they did, they would get a big pay bump. But, you know, like, a lot of people aren't even trained to handle those kinds of things. And so I think it's very important to be mindful of that. And I just don't think it's fair to expect that from people just because they're working with the public. So I just wanted to illustrate that really quickly, because I know a lot of people in those professions struggle as well with this topic. So again, I hope you guys liked my video. I hope you guys liked me discussing the whole trauma dumping versus venting. Again, I feel like venting is a lot more positive and a lot more healthy, and it's a lot more conducive to a stronger bond with friends or even with a stranger or whatever. And like I said before, I think we all have our moments where we need to trauma dump. We're human. It happens. but I don't think it should be a habit and I don't think it should be frequent. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I want to know how you feel about trauma dumping versus venting, your experiences. I'd love to hear you guys sound off in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed this video. And again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to everyone watching, and I'll see you guys in the new year. Bye!